We got new Earl Sweatshirt not even a year after some rap songs. And I didn't expect to hear from this man at least for 20 years, given that it felt like he was suffering from extreme stress over trying to deal with his depression on some rap songs. So I was comfortable not getting another Earl Sweatshirt project, just knowing how much of a tempestuous run some rap songs was. But he seemed to somewhat bounce back maybe with this new EP, surprised out of nowhere, called Feet of Clay. I don't really know what to expect from this. Earl's music, you know, as of late has definitely struck me more as like an adventurer trying to go back into the depths of the world, finding value in the past as opposed to the present or the future, which is why if I could describe his music in any way, at least the type of music he's making right now, I would describe it as antique. Let's try track number 174.
That's
the first line.
You don't got no wins, just the master losses. Phone got you living vicarious. I smell it cause it's so hot to fail.
See, there's a way to put your own dissatisfaction with life in your own state of being simply by a line like that without having to elaborate, you know, and go into a whole song about why social media and why, you know, cell phones are disconnecting people from reality. One line, that's all it takes. You don't need a whole song. You don't need a whole scheme, a whole concept, just one line.
As far as tracks we going off,
it's beautiful how the dude has evolved lyrically. Like the streets flooded, and then he connects the line to a rain dance. Earl's music has really become like those paintings that people auction off. It's grown in value quite largely, in my opinion, due to its aesthetic. He's rapping over like this old sample piano. Track number 2 is East.
Double back when you got it made. 36 round.
The song is terrible. This is so terrible, but this track instrumentally is awful. Like, it's got this weird looped accordion sounding like it's like from some weird 1900s Turkish film. And I guess what's so weird about it is that it's a track that in modern time would, if you could imagine the movie It being marketed as a comedy, this is the instrumental that would be playing. Clown type beat. Still, even with this awful accordion loop and how somewhat goofy it sounds, his voice still fits. This definitely got me feeling like that Jay-Z and Timbaland video when they were in the studio going off to some horrible drums. But honestly, all of Earl's music right now sounds like he's just at his lowest or always in the slums. There's never a break in his voice. There's never a change in his tone. And it's like, if it were anything like myself, you just keep this tone and you keep this consistency so as not to be distracted by any passing emotions or feelings that'll get you off, you know, your quote-unquote path. And I think this is kind of like a struggle to do so, a struggle to remain consistent. He mentions on this track how he misses his father and how, depending on how he deals with it, it might hit him a certain way. Then he mentions further in the track how he deals with it through like venom, like when the venom is replenished. So I'm assuming he means he's dealing with it through drugs or he's dealing with it through alcohol. And like I said, the track is really goofy. I don't really like it like that, but it helps to illustrate this whole, I'm doing this just to keep my mind off something bigger. Next track is MTOMB or MTOMB, whatever.
Ain't what I see through the maze. I'm an eagle spinner there at the creek. We got the same amount of heat to it. They not as real. 25 was a quarter of life. I'm on it. I strike trials, trick knowledge, find 10 rounds and dip out. What time is it? Mommy, shot it, blew the fist.
Pray for the people. I gotta find that song now. So I just listened to the track again, and this dude Earl just said, guess I was right, 25 was a quarter to life. I strike trials. It's almost like he's likening living almost to like being persecuted or being on trial. Odd thing is, there's no one really responsible for some of the things that are happening in this quarter of his life. And for some, I'm sure there may be, but for others, I'm sure it's just life itself. To feel like living is persecution in a way really helps to illustrate his battle, you know, and his issue with depression. And also love this R&B soul sample in the background, his voice perfectly riding over top of it. I say artists that have a lot less emotional delivery, tend to work better and much more effectively over samples that have their own soul and rhythm. It acts as a nice balance between the two, and it also really helps to illustrate this consistency within Earl's voice, because he's really evolved from this whole angsty edginess that was matched with production to emphasize his voice, as opposed to here where it's almost like he's rapping in this way to almost keep from having to acknowledge his emotional grief. His flow in his voice and his cadence and the way he raps is almost like if I keep going forward, I don't have to acknowledge anything that's going on in my peripheral. That way I don't have to acknowledge my emotions, I don't have to acknowledge my grief, I don't have to acknowledge my pain. Only issue with that track is just how criminally short it is. Track number 4 is OD.
If I watch the child get introduced to violence, I beat you to the point my noose is golden. Tiptoeing too much love my sister showed in a run.
The horns and the almost glitchiness and choppiness of this track to me just help to illustrate what a tempestuous place that he's in. And I did discuss and talk about some of that when I reviewed the Earl Sweatshirt Some Rap Songs album from last year. And these tracks, you know, hearing them here, they don't really feel like additions to that album. They don't really feel like side Bs or loosies or cuts that didn't just make the album. You feel like extensions of subjects that he may not have gone a little bit further in depth in before. But they don't really feel like cuts that didn't make it. They feel more like cuts that were a little bit more into. Maybe these didn't make it because he felt like maybe I'm giving a little too much. Maybe I'm talking about this for too long. I mean, this track he's talking about is alcoholism. He's talking about dealing with, again, grief and pain through substance abuse. Track number 4, El Toro Combo Meal. Oh, it's got Mavi on it. I've heard some people call him Mavi.
Lost in the alley, in the air, and I spun to the loss of my grandmama buried.
I love the way Mavi raps.
I'm on their neck to my car parties, party French. Small with a few niggas sparking that large percentage. These magic hands, nigga, what? Put my fears in a box like a prayer that you won't read. Spirited away the whole thing. Hearing away I won't leave.
Either understand or get through it, as opposed to bottling it up, keeping it all inside, or just having no one else to discuss it with or talk to. Dealing with something as complicated as depression seems to be, there's not really a definitive answer or necessarily the best way to deal with or handle it. And I guess going through the trials that, you know, come with that, I would assume he's just saying that, you know, some people do better or fare better if they figure it out. Some people do better or fare better if they get help. Some people do better or fare better if they express it to the world. So it all really is a case-by-case basis. It depends on the person, the individual. I did want to touch on one thing, though, because a lot of people, I hate this comparison between Mavi and Earl Sweatshirt as if they're the same person. People say, oh, Mavi sounds a little too much like Earl Sweatshirt. And to me, I could see vocally how the two could be similar or could remind you of one another. But to me, I just think Mavi's voice is so much more optimistic and so much more bright than Earl's is. Earl's voice sounds much more rooted in the past, more like he's comfortable being in a place where no one else can really get to him. Whereas Mavi is embracing kind of the world in a way. If you listen to a project like Let the Sun Talk, it's almost like he's allowing light into a future that he wants to see, whereas Earl seems much more rooted in the past. So you kind of have those two different, in my opinion, interpretations coming to the same track. Despite his dead style delivery in a lot of ways, Mavi's lyrics are still much more hopeful, I feel, whereas Earl's are much more reflective. Their vocal tone may be similar sometimes, but the way they express those ideas are very different to me. Track number 6, I'm not trying to look like an idiot right now, so I'm just gonna say Cookies.
When I knew you wasn't a snitch. Cash money, baby, we lie. I remember they ain't save me a slot. Back up when niggas hit the jackpot. I got sense of spark. I see real niggas just jab, they don't bark. I see you try and rekindle the spark. Real niggas hit the jackpot. I got sense of trying to give me some guap. I need a 10.
Despite the awkward like drum pattern and him, I guess, rapping and over this like glitchy lo-fi instrumental going on in the background, his flow and his voice is really what keeps this track going, which is a rarity in a lot of Earl's music now, as he usually gets swallowed up in a lot of the samples. It's rare for him to come out at the forefront of a track and just be the center focus and the dominator. Track number 7 is 4N featuring Mac. Okay. Sounds like a funky, groovy sample that's got chopped and glitched out to hell. Am I listening to a backwards instrumental?
But it's me at no war ceremony, perish the hegemony, horse feathers on me.
Be okay, the same voltage, hold it charged like the phone lit.
A very strange bass line for that track. But that was the project. Feet of Clay from Earl Sweatshirt. Definitely feels like hidden parts of some rap songs. I wouldn't say that this could snugly fit in with some rap songs, just because it carries a similar aesthetic. I'll just say it carries the same tone and same subject matter that some rap songs does. Yeah, instrumentally here, I think there is a lot to be appreciated when it comes to the resourcefulness and just how creative these instrumentals are when it comes to their lo-fi aesthetic, when it comes to some of them being glitchy. Some of them help to illustrate a point of this tempest going on with Earl or surrounding Earl. Sometimes he's at the center of the storm, sometimes he's on the outside of it looking in. Despite the tracks feeling somewhat short, they still feel finished. I do think when it comes to features, Earl does know how to let, you know, his guests shine. I think he easily could have rapped with the same intensity and the same velocity of someone like a Mavi, or rapped with the same, I guess, flow as someone like a Mac, but he didn't really seem to care about that. That may lead to them outshining him or outperforming him, but I don't think it was something that he wasn't aware of. It's really hard and difficult to say someone's becoming a bit more avant-garde when you listen to them take from the old and just fuse it more so with the new, not necessarily a completely new product all on its own. I do think there are elements that are a bit more fragmented. Again, the beat off of East is really jarring, really goofy almost. I know we've always looked at rap as this assumption of rhythm and poetry, but there, at least for a long time, has been a more emphasis on the rhythm as opposed to the poetry. So when we go back to the poet aspect of it, I think music like this becomes more jarring for people, pretty much because it's more centered on the poetry, not necessarily in the scheme or the rhythm of it. It's really more so emphasis on what the person is saying, but not in what way they're saying it, which is why when it comes to poetry, it fits so well over really any kind of instrumental, assuming the subject matter fits what the instrumental is kind of delivering to. Yeah, this EP details depression in a poetic way and dealing with life obstacles in a poetic way, as opposed to trying to make the most clever bar or the most clever scheme. There are still a lot of bars in this project, but not delivered from the perspective of a rapper, more from the perspective of a poet to me. So that's what I feel on Feet of Clay EP. I enjoyed it. I think I'm probably going to enjoy it a bit more with some more listens. And yeah, that's how I'm feeling. Thank you for watching. Let me know how you felt about it in the comment section down below. And yeah, that's it. That's all I got to say.